to Larry King Live. Tonight, new support for the single gunman theory. JFK's autopsy doctors break a 30-year silence. But what they have to say inflames the conspiracy theorists. The latest charge and countercharge over who shot Kennedy. Now, here's Bob Beckel sitting in for Larry King.
Good evening. People who reject the official version of John F. Kennedy's murder cite the mystery surrounding the military autopsy. If nothing sinister happened, they argue, why are the autopsy doctors so silent? Well, that silence ended this week, but anyone hoping to see the Warren Commission blown away was sorely disappointed. The Journal of the American Medical Association released the recollections of two autopsy doctors. They support the notion, rejected by Oliver Stone and a majority of the American people, namely, that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. We'll devote the whole hour to this topic with prominent voices on several sides of the story. But we'll start with the man who made the news this week, Dr. George Lundberg, editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA for short. The doctor joins us from Chicago. Doctor, welcome to Larry King Live. Nice to have you here. For those in our audience who did not read your journal, can you give us the recollections of the doctors who performed the autopsy on President Kennedy?
Well, the article itself was written by Dennis Brio, and it's 14 pages, 11,000 words. And we're actually recommending to as many of the American people as possible that they get the whole article and that they read it, because there's so many nuances in it, so many angles, so many human interest elements that date from the whole 28 years from the time of the autopsy until now. But in a nutshell, the article says that Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell found scientific evidence, which in my view is irrefutable, that President Kennedy was struck by 2 bullets and 2 bullets only, that the first one entered the top of the back near the neck, and then exited through the front of the throat, just below, having gone through the windpipe just below the Adam's apple, and the second bullet struck him in the back of the head, above the hairline and just to the right of the midline, exploded the right side of the head, destroying a large amount of the brain, and then exploded out to the front with a surely lethal wound. The wound to the neck, he could have lived through. The good doctors at Parkland could have taken care of that one, but the head wound, nobody could have done anything with. It was just too severe.
Doctor, I did read the whole article, and throughout the entire discourse, both these doctors were agonized about the various conspiracy theories that have been talked about over the years, a lot of what they thought was terribly misleading information. Why then did it take them all these years to come out, 29 years now, remain there to stay silent when they could have come out and maybe ended some speculation a lot earlier?
We, of course, asked them early on, and I had personally been trying to get this article into the journal for 7 years, and they had declined to do it for all that time until this year. Basically, I think their statement would be that they did their autopsy, they got the basic answer correctly, they reported it to the Warren Commission, the whole autopsy is in there. That particular report has been looked at by panels of experts a number of times since then, and there's been almost unanimous agreement by people in forensic pathology that they got the right answer. They did it right. 2 bullets from the back, no other bullets. There's only one person I know in the country who has looked at the inside information and disagrees with that, but everybody else seems to agree with it. But they figured, hey, if it's there and everybody agrees with it and that's well known, why should they have to say it again? Why should they have to come out every 5 years or every 10 years to defend what they've already stated and what has already been defended by others who are completely unbiased, expert people in their field, and they just didn't think it was necessary. They also didn't trust the media. They expected that they would be bludgeoned in one way or another by various members of the media, and they didn't feel like there was any need to expose themselves to that. They both had highly successful professional careers before and after that one day in November 1963, and they just pretty much wanted to leave it there. Now, how did we get the story? Well, ultimately we got it because they were persuaded that our argument that this belonged in the legitimate medical literature. So it would be in every doctor's office, in their library, all the medical school libraries, all the hospital libraries around the world, so that history would have it there. And I'm quite sure that 25, 50, or 100 years from now, when historians look back at this event, and they want to find out about what happened medically and what happened at the autopsy, they're going to go to the Journal of the American Medical Association, and these 14 pages will stand as the readily accessible everywhere definitive history.
Okay, Doctor, I don't want to, I know you've got the Journal of American Medical Association does not necessarily want to be compared with the JFK movie, but we know that this JFK movie has been very controversial. One of the most controversial scenes in that movie that I remember was during the autopsy scene itself, that there were a number of military personnel standing around, putting an awful lot of pressure on Dr. Humes to hurry up the autopsy. It looked like there was intimidation and they were running it. Can you tell us what they said about the military presence and whether they felt intimidated by that presence, if in fact it was there?
Dr. Humes was in charge during the autopsy and all the way to the report. There's no question about that. Frankly, that scene and that movie probably helped motivate Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell to come forward. Dr. Humes saw it. Dr. Boswell had not by the time we did the interview. Dr. Humes was absolutely incensed, and as you read in the article, he said that he was tired of being beaten up by people who are supremely ignorant about the scientific facts of the case, and that was a major motivation to come forward.
One thing I know,
there were no generals in that room telling him what to do. He was in charge. He was about 40 years old, as you saw in that Oliver Stone movie. That he looked like he was about 90 years old, but he was about 40 and in charge.
One thing I didn't get out of the article, or maybe I missed it, but who actually ordered, it seems that the doctor didn't know who ordered the autopsy. He got a superior, told him to perform it. But has it ever been determined who actually requested the autopsy?
Well, that's one of the questions I brought out in the article, and I don't think it has been. He thinks probably Mrs. Kennedy did. She would have been the next of kin, or Bobby Kennedy. He was the Attorney General.
But nobody ever, the Order Commission never asked that question?
If they did, I don't know about it, and it seemed to be a surprise question to Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell when I asked him that specific question.
Okay, let me take you to whether this interview solves any of the concern around the so-called single bullet theory, which is, as I understand it, that the first bullet that entered the president's neck from behind and exited out front also went into Governor Connolly, went through his chest and ended through his wrist, ended up in his thigh. Governor Connolly, then Governor of Texas, was sitting in the front seat right in front of the president. Does any of the information from these doctors confirm the single bullet theory?
Well, first off, we didn't study Governor Connolly. We didn't interview him. We didn't study him, and we didn't go into any depth about that part at all. So the article is really not about that. It's about the assassination of President Kennedy. But there is some information there that would be helpful. Dr. Humes himself says in the article that he supports the single bullet theory. In addition, the kind of path that the first bullet took, not striking bone, would mean that a high-velocity bullet such as it was would not have lost enough velocity going through the president to not be able to inflict the kind of damage that was received by Governor Connolly. So in that sense, it makes sense that that could have very well been the bullet that did it. But we didn't take an editorial position.
Okay, but Dr. Lumberg, you did take an editorial position that Lee Harvey Oswald or somebody there was only one assassin who fired 2 bullets that killed President Kennedy. The tape is very clear that Governor Connolly was hit almost simultaneously with President Kennedy. So therefore, you would have to deduce from that, wouldn't you, that the same bullet that hit President Kennedy hit John Connolly, or you'd have to argue, if not, somebody else was shooting.
Or that there was a third bullet that was fired by the assassin, which is likely true, and that the third bullet hit Governor Connolly. That's certainly a possibility. I don't really know, and again, this isn't what we addressed. I'm inclined to think it was the bullet that went through the president's throat that struck Governor Connolly, but I'm not adamant in that position.
Okay, let me go. I don't want to keep raising all the conspiracy theories here, but
please raise them all. We want to destroy them one by one.
There are some that are sort of most Americans have heard about. This is one maybe not so clear, but there was allegations through the years that what the doctors in Parkland Hospital in Dallas saw and reported to have seen of the president's body when it left Dallas was not the same report that Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell, the 2 pathologists at Bethesda, saw. Did you or did they in any way resolve that issue?
I believe it's completely resolved. Dennis Brio in Dallas interviewed Dr. Malcolm Perry, who did the tracheostomy, who has seen the photographs of the autopsy of the president, and he says that the tracheostomy wound that he gave the president in trying to save his life in Dallas was the same wound that was present in the autopsy. So I believe that there was no marring and no mutilation such as one of the recent books has alleged.
Okay, when we come back, we'll be joined by a pathologist and lawyer who disputes the single bullet theory and says JAMA hasn't solved anything. I'm Bob Beckel. Don't go away.
What these new doctor revelations point out is that the commission was right. President Kennedy was unfortunately, tragically assassinated by 2 bullets, shot from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository by Lee Harvey Oswald.
Wake up. Call 1-900-976-WAKE. Get out of bed and get ahead. Use your touch-tone phone. Call 1-900-976-WAKE. We're the wake-up that works, so why worry? Call 1-900-976-WAKE. Do it now. Only $2 per call. Depend on us. Call 1-900-976-WAKE. And wake up right. Wake up bright. Wake up to us tomorrow. Sunday on CNN World Report, an island of peace in a region surrounded by turmoil. Why Costa Rica is Central America's strongest democracy. Then adjusting to democratic rule. Will independence be enough to solve Namibia's problems of poverty and disease? And in Poland, government control still lingers over the nation's media. Dozens of nations across the globe are confronting the problems of democracy. A special edition of CNN World Report, 3 p.m. Eastern Sunday.
Welcome back to Larry King Live. Is the JFK assassination controversy over, or is it now even more complicated? Joining our discussion now from Pittsburgh is Dr. Cyril Wecht. He's a forensic pathologist who worked with the House Assassinations Committee that reviewed the Warren Commission's work. He's a longtime critic of the one-bullet theory. Dr. Wecht, thank you for joining us. Have you read the article in the Journal of American Medical Association?
No, I have not seen the article. I understand it was faxed to my office today by Dr. Lundberg. I just came directly from the airport, so I've not seen it. I've read the news releases, however, and the newspaper accounts.
Okay, good, Doctor. Then let me ask you, if what you read about this, you have long been a critic of the one-bullet theory, as I explained before. The first bullet went through President Kennedy. Warren Commission said it also hit Governor Connolly. You have contested that. Is there anything that you've read in these interviews of these pathologists or the doctors at Parkland that now make you change your opinion that perhaps there really was only one bullet?
Absolutely not. I must say I'm completely flabbergasted by the impression that has been created here that there is anything new. There is nothing new. You can put Humes and Boswell on a block of ice and save them with prehistoric monsters and thaw them out 1,000 years from now. That doesn't mean that there's something new. Certainly, it's not quite correct to say that they have not disclosed anything publicly. They met with the Forensic Pathology Panel in '78 in Washington, D.C., and gave lengthy interviews. Dr. Boswell has devoted an interview and a full chapter on him in Harrison Witherspoon's book, High Trees and Number 2. Let's talk about the actual facts here. First of all, by the way, I think it should be made clear the American public should be disabused of the idea that this is the AMA speaking. This is JAMA. It's a journal. The AMA has taken no position on the Warren Commission report. I'm a card-carrying member of the AMA, have been for 36 years, and I cast no ballot on this as one of 400,000 members. Number 2, we should also be aware that there's a third pathologist who was involved in this autopsy, Pierre Fink, who I noted in one of the press releases was referred to as a mild, meek-mannered person. Whoever said that did not know Pierre Fink. Pierre Fink is a very strong-minded individual, and the only one of the 3 who had had some experience in forensic pathology. Very significant. There's been no contact made of Pierre Fink, and he's had nothing to say about this. Now let's talk about the fact that this is now being publicly disclosed, and Humes and Boswell have had it up to here or wherever they've had
Doctor,
it.
let me just interrupt here for a second, because for our audience's sake, I want to try to keep on the facts, as you said. So can we try
All right,
to...
I want to deal with the facts.
Okay,
I want to give
but
the
leaving
facts.
aside, this is an interview with these pathologists. Maybe they've been out in public before, but what they've said in the conclusion of JAMA is that this one assassin acted alone and there were 2 bullets. Now, can we go back to your principal concern about the single bullet theory?
Well, all right, but let's just talk for a moment, if we may, about the analysis that Dr. Lundberg claims to have done. Isn't that germane? Isn't that the basis for the entire discussion?
Go ahead.
He says that he has analyzed this. I want to point out a few things. Humes and Boswell never knew that there was a bullet hole in the front of the president's neck on the night of the autopsy. How could they have analyzed anything then, and how can Lundberg then analyze it vicariously today, 29 years later, in retrospect? Humes and Boswell put a bullet hole at the base of the president's skull, and the Ramsey-Clark panel in 1968 and the forensic pathology panel in 1978 moved it up 4 solid inches to a point at the colic rather than at the base of the skull. Humes and Boswell went along with it then in 78 when they were confronted with this by the forensic pathologist. How could that have been analyzed by Dr. Lundberg? Humes and Boswell drew the bullet hole on the president's back on a diagram the night of the autopsy, several inches down below the shoulder, 6 inches to be precise, and when they gave their oral testimony for the Warren Commission in March of 1964, they moved it up several inches, saying that their memories constituted better evidence of where the bullet hole really was. The point that I'm making, Mr. Beckel, is how can Dr. Lundberg or anybody make an analysis based upon that kind of erroneous information?
Okay, well, we've got the advantage of asking. Dr. Lundberg, you just heard this. I'll get you back to you just a second.
All right, you want to talk about the single bullet theory? I'd love to talk about it.
Okay, I'll get back to you on that, but I want Dr. Lundberg just to respond briefly, if you could, Doctor, to what Cyril Wecht said about your analysis.
Well, which part of it do you want me to start with?
Well,
Should we start with his claim that we had no contact with Dr. Fink? That is untrue. We invited Dr. Fink from Switzerland, where he now lives, to come to Florida to join the other 2 pathologists in the interview, and he declined. We invited him a second time, and he declined again. So we did contact him. We attempted to. Second, Dr. Fink, of course, signed off on the original autopsy just exactly as Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell did, freely of his own free will, and that's in the Warren Commission report.
Well, what about...
In terms of those drawings that Dr. Wecht is referring to, Dr. Boswell told us he's the world's worst artist, and he wished he hadn't drawn them so badly the first turnaround because it did cause a lot of confusion and a lot of trouble. Fortunately, they took photographs, 52 photographs of virtually everything there was, plus large numbers of x-rays, and those photographs and those x-rays have been evaluated first by a panel of 4 experts in 1968 who were put together by Attorney General Ramsey-Clark at the request of Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell. The conspiracy theorists were coming out from under mushrooms about that time, and Dr. Boswell wrote to Ramsey-Clark and said, hey, some people are challenging our stuff. Please appoint a nonpartisan, unbiased panel of experts to evaluate the whole thing, to see whether we were right or wrong. They did. I have that full report. I've studied it fully personally, and they supported the results of the autopsy in the full essence, and even added additional new forensic evidence that solidified the position of Humes and Boswell.
Okay, let me go back to Dr. Wecht here for a second. Can I ask both of you gentlemen, I know you're extremely well-versed in this subject, but for those of us who may not be as well-versed, I try to keep our answers as user-friendly, listener-friendly as we can. Dr. Wecht, let's go back to the single bullet theory. As I understand it, the bullet that was purported to be found on the stretcher of Governor Conley, the so-called clean, intact bullet, the Warren Commission said about that bullet that it was indeed the bullet that entered President Kennedy's neck and went through President Johnson, and that they have concluded that, in fact, was the bullet. You have contended, as have a number of other people, that that could not possibly be the bullet. Nothing changed your mind about that subsequent to, because of this report?
Let's review the single bullet theory very quickly, Mr. Beckel. On the night of the autopsy, Humes and Boswell are 2 great experts here who have been brushed off and pushed to center stage by Dr. Lundberg, said that the bullet that had been reported found at Parkland Hospital on the stretcher by a man who was trying to get to the men's room and found the stretcher blocking the way. They concluded that the stretcher bullet, as it came to be known, Commission Exhibit 399, was from the president's back, forced out by pressure applied to the front of the president's chest in resuscitative measures. That's their expertise. The next day, they learned when they made a call to Parkland Hospital. They finally got around to saying, hey, maybe we had a talk with the doctors at Parkland, they called, and they learned of the bullet hole in the front of the president's neck. Now they said that the bullet was stopped by the starch collar. Dr. Lundberg some minutes ago said that the velocity would not have been decreased very much, and I agree with him. But evidently, President Kennedy had a starch collar that could stop it, at least in the minds of Humes and Boswell, our experts, on Saturday, November 23rd. And now 5 months later, when they put together the single bullet theory, which they had to do, now the bullet was from Governor Connolly's left thigh. Here's the single bullet theory. A bullet hit President Kennedy in the upward revised position in his back. It went through his neck, and then it came out, and then it went over, and it got into John Connolly's right posterior axillary area. That means behind the right armpit. And then it moved at a downward angle of 27 degrees. It came out from his right front chest below the nipple. The right wrist is shown here, frame 230 on the Zapruder film, holding a large Texas white Stetson hat. The bullet then went over, got into the back of the right wrist. First, it had broken the right fifth rib, destroying 10 centimeters, 4 inches of that bone, and then it caused a comminuted fracture. That's a fragmented fracture at the distal end of the radius, one of 2 bones that come from the elbow to the wrist, and the radius fans out and gets dense just before it meets the 8 small bones of the wrist. And Connolly, remember, 6'4", big guy, came out from the front of his wrist, went into his left thigh, and then it emerged from his left thigh, and now the stretcher bullet, the hero of the single bullet theory, was from John Connolly. The single bullet theory is the sine qua non of the Warren Commission report. I'm really a little surprised because Dr. Warrenberg is a very intelligent man. There's no way to finesse this. There's no way to equivocate on this. You either have a single bullet theory and the possibility of a sole assassin, or you do not have a single bullet theory. You cannot avoid that. You cannot dance around.
All right, I'm going to give Dr. Lundberg a chance to answer that when we come back. Clearly, you haven't been changed your mind on this, Dr. Wecht. We're going to go away. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll be taking your phone calls.
I'm absolutely convinced that there were 3 shots fired, all from the rear. 2 hit the president, 1 hit me. The first bullet, in my opinion, did not hit me. The second bullet could have hit him and could have hit me. The third shot that was fired hit only him. And if there was a magic bullet, it had to be the second bullet that was fired, not the first.
Have you ever created or invented a product? Don't just let it sit there. Do something about it. You can start by calling the Inventor's Helpline.
By Robert Blakey and Frank Mankiewicz, former press secretary to Robert Kennedy. First, let me go back to Dr. Lundgren. Dr. Lundgren, you heard Dr. Wecht. What's your response? On the single bullet theory, in other words, what he said to you, if I could encapsulate that, was if you buy the notion that there was only one assassin, you have to buy into the notion there's only a one-bullet theory.
Well, I don't really see that follows at all. We were involved in, and I've been actually studying myself as a pathologist the whole time since President Kennedy was assassinated, the various theories, the various findings, and what we confined ourselves to with this particular report is that the president was assassinated. We're talking about the assassination. 2 bullets and 2 bullets only from a high-velocity rifle struck the president from behind. The evidence for that we've already stated in part. In addition, there was an abrasion collar, which is the burning that happens at the wound of entrance in the high back, down from the neck, from the first bullet that struck the president. That defines a wound of entrance. There was no such collar on that part of the wound of exit that was still preserved after the tracheostomy in the front, so that's a wound of exit. And the beveling of the bone in the skull of the president, again, is diagnostic of the direction of the bullet moving. It moved from back to front, producing a small hole in the skull where it entered the back, a large hole in that part of the skull where it exited into the brain, exploded the brain, and then exploded out, and the bullet hole on the way out had a small hole where it entered into the skull in the front and a large hole on the outside. Just like a lot of people have seen BBs as they might hit a piece of glass. The BB gun hits the glass. It's a small hole in the side it hits it, and a larger hole in the outside.
Okay, let me get Dr.
That's diagnostic.
Okay, let me get Dr. Wecht back in here for a second. Dr. Wecht, do you agree that the however many assassins there were, however many bullets were fired, that they all were fired from behind?
Oh, no. One of the shooters was definitely in the grassy knoll area. There's all kinds of evidence that evidently Dr. Lundberg has not apprised himself of with regard to things that he just
I would prize myself of it, Dr. Wecht, but they're not scientific evidence.
Well, yes, please, Dr. Examine the
Observational
twice,
evidence
Dr.
is
Lundberg.
not
Okay,
scientific evidence.
gentlemen, I'm going to give Dr.
I let Dr. Lundberg speak, without interruption.
No, I've got to get away for a second, Dr. Wecht. I promise I'll come right back to you. When we come back, more on the Kennedy assassination and your phone calls. We promise.
Through darkness they passed, through seas unknown and dangers untold. Sustained by faith, Columbus and crew sailed bravely to a new world. Now, on the 500th anniversary of the discovery of America, in accordance with an act of Congress, the United States Christopher Columbus Quincentenary Jubilee Commission has authorized the official Christopher Columbus Commemorative Medallion. The front portrays the heroic image of Columbus from an original sculpture by Frederick Bartholdi. The reverse is an original design of Columbus's three ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. This precious golden commemorative has been struck by the American Founders Mint with the official 500th anniversary insignia and is accompanied by a signed certificate of registration. The official Christopher Columbus commemorative is available at the issue price of $10 each plus $2 postage. There's a limit of 3 per household. Call now to order.
I liked having sex with him. He wasn't afraid of experimenting. I like men like that. Men who give me pleasure. He gave me a lot of pleasure.
No other sports sedan looks like it. No other performs like it, or even feels like it. The 1992 Buick Regal, a stunning departure from the look-alike competition. And beneath Regal's liquid contours, an impressive list of safety and performance features, including anti-lock brakes. Plus, right now with special low-rate GMAC financing, you can save over $2,000. Buick Regal, there's no other sports sedan like it. Act now and save over $2,000 at your Better Buick dealer.
Best Love Concerto. And Best Love Dances. Plus, you'll get Best Love Ballets and Best Love Piano Music. The Collector's Library of Best Love Classics is just $19.95. To order, call this toll-free number now.
This is CNN.
Hello, I'm Leon Harris in Atlanta. A mother of 4 is still being held hostage in her San Bernardino, California home in a standoff that began more than 24 hours ago. Her children and another child who was in the home were released Thursday by 2 armed gunmen. Police are negotiating with the gunmen who entered the home nearly early Thursday after robbing the family next door. A Montana mortician faces theft charges in a bizarre case. Authorities say Dixon Rice agreed to cremate bodies with their caskets, but instead Rice allegedly cremated the bodies and returned the caskets to his inventory to be used again. Dixon is also accused of giving members of one family what he said were a relative's ashes before the relative's body had been cremated. More news in 30 minutes. CNN Overnight continues now with Larry King Live.
Welcome back to Larry King Live. I'm Bob Beckles sitting in. The subject, President Kennedy's autopsy, and new testimony from some of the doctors involved. My guest, Dr. George Lundberg of the Journal of the American Medical Association, Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's a critic of the single bullet theory, Robert Blakey, who was chief counsel to the House Assassinations Committee, and Frank Mankiewicz, Robert Kennedy's press secretary, who helped publicize Oliver Stone's JFK movie. Dr. Wecht, I want to give you a chance to respond. I did have to catch up, but I can please ask everybody. It's a complicated subject, but please keep our answers as concise as we possibly can. Dr. Wecht, go ahead.
Okay, very quickly. There's no way to evaluate the question of an abrasion collarette on the neck wound. There's just a very, very tiny portion which was never even appreciated by Humes and Boswell, and which can be very imperceptibly discerned, if at all, at this time. And then furthermore, with regard to the question of beveling, Dr. Lundberg presents it as if it is a definitive finding and a detailed explanation in the Warren Commission report that's simply incorrect. And then with regard to the head wounds and so on, I want to point out this, just to toss out for discussion too, that the brain of the president is missing, something that Dr. Humes and Boswell knew for 6 years and never said a word about until I pointed it out in August 1972 when I went into the National Archives. And for 20 years, we've not heard anything from Humes and Boswell or from JAMA or anybody else about where is the missing brain and where are the microscopic tissue slides that would help us talk about entrance and exit moves histologically, okay?
All right, fine. Let me bring Frank Mankiewicz in here. Frank, welcome. You have been critical of the Warren Commission as well. Tell us if anything you've read now of the JAMA report may change your mind about that, and also give us your views on the single bullet theory.
No, nothing I've read has caused me to change my mind. These are the same two doctors who botched the autopsy in the first place, and now they come along after 29 years and say they were right. The only thing that has intervened is the movie. But the single bullet theory, Dr. Lundberg says that he's not talking about the single bullet theory, but he is. That's the whole function of this autopsy, was to establish the single bullet theory, because without it, you have a conspiracy. It's very simple. The Zapruder film makes it very clear that there was only time for 3 shots between the time the president's car moves along and the time the president's head is blown off by the final shot. 3 shots. 1 missed. We know that because it's off somewhere and they found it and heard it. So there has to be, all the damage has to be caused by 2 bullets, or else there was another shooter. It's that simple. 2 shooters and 1 conspiracy. Right. So 1 bullet took off the president's head. The other one must have done all the damage. Enter the back, out the throat, wait for 1 second, go into Governor Connolly, do all the things Dr. Wecht talked about. And if you don't believe that, if you don't establish that there was 1 bullet that did all that damage and zigzagged around and moved and took all that time, then you must believe that there was another assassin. It's that simple.
Okay, Robert Blakey, let me bring you in from Miami. You were chief counsel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. You've read the JAMA report, I assume. You just heard Frank Mankiewicz. It all seems to center on this single bullet theory. What's your view of that, and what do you think about the interview with these doctors?
These doctors have not made a revelation. They confirmed what they told us in 1979, as Dr. Wecht indicated. On the other hand, what Dr. Wecht has not indicated, that he was one of a panel of 8 forensic pathologists who looked at the materials, and Dr. Wecht is the odd man out. We carefully examined the single bullet theory and the question of how many shots were fired at the president and hit him and from what direction. And we established beyond a reasonable doubt that there were 2 shots that hit the president, and 1 shot hit both Governor Connolly and the president. And the linchpin of that proof is that we took minute pieces of metal from Governor Connolly's wrist, and we matched them through neutron activation analysis to the bullet that Dr. Wecht called CE-399. That bullet hit Governor Connolly's wrist. That bullet was also ballistically matched to Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle, which was found in the 6th floor depository. We did a trajectory analysis of the point in Governor Connolly's back, the point in President Kennedy's neck, and the point behind President Kennedy, and drew a straight line through them right back up in the 6th floor depository. The single bullet theory is proven beyond a reasonable doubt for anyone who has reasonable technical competence and will study the physical and other evidence. The allegations that the autopsy photographs or x-rays were altered was specifically addressed by our people at the time, and we authenticated those materials. The importance of this material is not that it confirms the Warren Commission, for it doesn't. The Warren Commission says there was a single assassin. The importance of it is it refutes the sort of paranoia perpetrated on the American public by Oliver Stone that there was a shot from the front right. That's what refuted by this. What the American Medical Association study does not say is whether there were other shooters in the plaza. In fact, that has to be handled by other evidence and cannot be resolved one way or the other by the autopsy.
Okay, let me come back in and bring Frank Mankiewicz back in here. We get back to the Oliver Stone movie again, as you mentioned, Frank.
Well, Bob Blakey has his own theory because he wrote a book. He has another conspiracy in mind, and he's naturally a sworn enemy of anybody else's idea of a conspiracy. But the movie makes it very clear that the Warren Commission was wrong. Makes it very clear it was not a lone assassin because it couldn't have been. Ballistically or physically, that single bullet theory simply does not work.
But I got to ask you something. When Sammy the Bull Gravano can get turned against John Gotti in New York, right? How is it possible, if you believe in these conspiracies, how could something of this magnitude been kept quiet for 29 years, involving many agencies of the government and all that?
Because in the first place, if you look at the movie, and you can now do it at home, it's now in video, which may be why this report came out, it doesn't talk about a widespread conspiracy. It talks about a very small number of people, very small, closely held. It doesn't talk about a lot of agencies. It talks about a very small number of people from, lately or presently, some of those agencies. We're talking about, not about a conspiracy to rob the First National Bank of Wichita. We're talking about a conspiracy to kill the President of the United States for deep, high policy reasons, if you want to talk about the movie. I don't find it unnatural that the people who participated in that would not talk about it.
Okay, listen, we've got to take a break. We'll be back with your phone calls. Don't go away. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back. I want to go back to Dr. Lundberg for a second before we go to our phone calls. Doctor, Cyril Wecht had said one thing that I wanted to clarify with you, that these pathologists at Bethesda, the two that you talked to or that JAMA talked to, were not experienced forensic pathologists and had not had, or at least some allegations, maybe not from Cyril Wecht, they hadn't had a lot of experience in gunshot wounds. Can you respond to that?
Yes, both the pathologists from the Navy were general pathologists. They were well-trained and well-experienced in autopsy pathology, and anatomic and clinical pathology, but they were not board-certified or subspecialized in forensic pathology. They had experience with gunshot wounds, but not a great deal. Dr. Fink, on the other hand, came from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, where he was in the wound ballistics branch as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. So he was the wound ballistics person. But the main point about this to realize is that the autopsy was a very ordinary autopsy, extremely easy to do on an extraordinary person under extraordinary circumstances.
Okay, fine. Let's go right to the phones. Las Vegas, Nevada. Hello, Las Vegas.
Yes, hello, Bob. I have a question. During the autopsy, Dr. Humes first tried to probe the back wound of Kennedy, and it went in at a 45-degree down angle, and he could feel the end with his little finger. Then Dr. Fink tried to probe it, and Agent Kellerman's testimony in the hearings committee in the hearing said that quotes Dr. Fink as saying there are no lanes for an outlet of this entry in this man's shoulder. The bullet did not go through Kennedy, and it did not come out his throat. That's the end of the story. There is no magic bullet.
Okay, Cyril Wecht, you want to respond to that? Is that information you agree with?
Yes, because this is very important because of Dr. Lundberg's prestigious position. To say that this was an ordinary autopsy and to suggest even that it was not necessary for top forensic pathologists to have performed this medical legal autopsy of the President of the United States of America does an incredible disservice to the entire field of forensic medicine and forensic science, and I'm truly appalled, the JFK assassination aside, that Dr. Lundberg would make such an assertion. Before tens of millions of Americans, setting back medical legal investigation in America literally a half a century.
I've got a lot of people to cover. Frank Mankiewicz, you heard the question from Las Vegas.
I think it's a very important question because I've seen that testimony before, that there was that bullet hole, that two of the surgeons probed it and could not find that it led to the exit. In other words, there was another bullet hole in the president's back that didn't emerge through the throat, if indeed the magic bullet did that at all. So it's just one more piece of evidence that there were more bullets and therefore more assassins. That's the point.
Robert Blakey, quickly, can you respond? I want to go back to the phone calls on that one issue.
Sure. There were two bullets found. Both of the bullets were ballistically linked to the rifle. Both bullets hit President Kennedy. The difficulty that your readers and your listeners have here is people are presenting the evidence in parts and not as whole. And when they present it in parts, they're confused. Dr. Wecht is a past master of the presentation of part, but not the whole story.
I'd love to do the whole story with you, Professor Blakey, anywhere,
Frank
anytime.
is here to sell a movie. You know, he says I wrote a book. That's true, but I'm not here to sell a book. I'm here to talk about the evidence. And the evidence is two from behind.
Okay, let's try not to challenge each other's motives here. Let's get back to the phones and have our viewers take you on. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hello, Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, I wonder how much Wecht's being paid by the movie maker. I want to address my question of importance to the head of the AMA Journal. First of all, I want to congratulate you, sir, for presenting the facts as I'm sure they are.
Thank you.
And what I want to know is how can we prevent people like this pig that made this film that has discredited the FBI, the CIA, and has led the children of this country to believe a lie.
Okay, how about that, Dr. Lundberg? Do you believe that Oliver Stone has perpetrated a lie on the American people?
I call the movie, which I saw twice, docu-fiction. Some of it is clearly true. Much of it is clearly fiction, but that's not the problem. The problem is the stuff that's in between, which young people are taking as if it were true when it's really fiction, although it's made up in such a way as to confuse and mislead even a fairly sophisticated film study person.
Okay, Doc, let me bring Frank Mankiewicz in here just so we can clear up Cyril Wecht's reputation here. You know about this movie. I assume Cyril Wecht, I'll get you a second, Cyril, was not paid to do this, right?
Okay. No, that's quite true. And I must say it shows extraordinary contempt for young people to assume that they believe everything they see on the screen. People are quite capable of making judgments. They know what's in the film. They know what's hypothesis. It's made very clear in the movie. I have more faith in young people, evidently, than this caller does, or for that matter, than Dr. Lundberg.
Okay, we'll be back with more calls in a second. I'll get back to Cyril Wecht when we get back. Stick around. Welcome back to Larry King Live, where we're talking about the latest evidence in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Cyril Wecht, a lot of conversation about this movie. One, have you seen it? Two, do you think it's a service or a disservice to the public?
Yes, I've seen it. It's a great movie. The acting is absolutely incredible. The directing, the entire technical approach. With regard to the last caller, who sounds like somebody that crawled out of the swamps in the Everglades of Florida, let me just tell you that I got paid less for all of the work that I've done on the movie than I get paid for one single day in going out of town for a malpractice or a murder case. But let's deal with the facts, okay? Professor Blakey talks about the work that was done. I invite your listeners. This is beautiful. Everybody can do it right now, Mr. Beckel, sitting in front of this camera. Place his spouse or his loved one or whoever right in front of him or her, and then take a string and draw it. And take the bullet then, which has to come from behind, forward, from above, to below, and from right to front, and then take it out of the front of your neck. Move it in that direction, and then seat the person directly in front of you, which is where John Connally was seated in relationship to President Kennedy that day. And if you can get that string to go over into the person's right armpit area who is seated in front of you, then you have done something that is truly miraculous. With regard to other experiments, let me just tell you, they did one experiment back in 1964 at the Edgewood Army Arsenal. They shot these bullets into goat carcasses to simulate the fracture of John Connally's rib, and they shot through human cadavers to simulate the fracture of John Connally's wrist. All those bullets had substantial deformity. Ask Professor Blakey why he would not repeat that experiment. I begged and implored, and begged. I offered to pay for the experiment.
In fairness to him, let's ask him. Dr. Blakey, can you, Robert Blakey, can you give us an answer to that? And please, gentlemen, please try to keep your answers as succinct as possible.
What you've heard is that he ample proof that he's not only a pathologist but a filibuster. He still hasn't responded to the neutron activation analysis test that squarely indicates that CE-399 hit Governor Connally's wrist.
That's not
we did a
trajectory
analysis. No, wait.
Go ahead.
Don't take my time and filibuster. We did a trajectory analysis. The trajectory from Governor Connally's back through the president's neck back to the window is straight. It is not curved. And Cyril, you know better than to suggest the contrary.
Okay, I know better that I've got to get out of here and take a break, and we're going to come back and we're going to get more of your phone calls, I promise. welcome back. Let's go back to the phones. Los Angeles, California. Hello, Los Angeles.
Yeah, my name is Jaffe. I was a staff investigator and photo analyst for Jim Garrison in '68. How does Blakey explain the fact that the photograph published on Life magazine, also known as Commission Exhibit 133A and 133B, were scientifically proved to be fake, phony, fabricated before the fact, and were published without the Warren Commission having met even 3 weeks?
Okay, before you answer, Robert, I'm going to ask you each, it'd be very short in your answers. We've got very little time left. Robert Blakey, go ahead. The photograph, was it doctored?
No, and it was unequivocally shown that Oswald's camera uniquely took that photograph. It was not altered. It's simple nonsense. That was shown by the Warren Commission in '63. It was shown by us in '79. The photographs are accurate. Among other things, Oswald gave a copy of that photograph signed on the back to his friends. This is pure nonsense.
Okay, let me go around very quickly. 10 seconds each, please. Dr. Lundgren, do you think now that maybe this conspiracy theories, because of your report, will be put behind us, or is this going to go on for another 100 years?
It'll go on, but serious people interested in science will accept 2 bullets from the back killing the president.
Okay, very quickly, yes or no, Cyril Wecht, is it over?
Oh, by no means. This was the most in-depth medical legal autopsy ever performed. The Warren Commission reports has been a fraud.
Frank?
Yes or no, is it over? Yeah. No, it's barely begun.
Okay, listen, it's been fascinating. We're going to thank all of our guests. Tomorrow night, Larry's going to be back with Basic Instincts, Sharon Stone. Thanks for watching. Take care.